The signal came from a forgotten sector, a fractured whisper buried under layers of cosmic radiation and stellar debris. At first, it was dismissed as static, another echo from a dead world. But the pattern held. Too consistent, too deliberate. It came from a system once catalogued as Sol, long believed to be stripped clean during the collapse era. And yet here it was transmitting. The Varelians prided themselves on their archives. They were not warriors, not conquerors. They were preservers, seekers of knowledge. So naturally, the Council dispatched a data vessel to investigate the anomaly. A deep analysis pod was dropped near the third planet. It unfolded silently in orbit and began downloading centuries of digital transmissions embedded in the planet's magnetosphere. They expected to find fragments, language records, perhaps cultural artifacts or mathematical data. What they found instead was chaos. Images of metal beasts crawling across torn landscapes. Explosions that turned cities to dust. Screaming voices drowned by gunfire. A world in constant motion, burning with violence. At first, the Varelians were amused. Surely these were fictional. Elaborate dramas, perhaps. Primitive forms of storytelling. The early files contained visual sequences labeled films. They depicted conflict after conflict. Clans battling with swords, machines rising against creators, global wars swallowing continents. The analysts assumed these stories were exaggerated projections of a fearful species' imagination. It was quaint, disturbing, but harmless. But the algorithms kept flagging anomalies. Cross-referencing these films with other data packets, satellite imagery, audio logs, news broadcasts, they began to match. Exact coordinates, time-stamped sequences, real names. The fiction wasn't fiction. It was historical record. A 20th century global conflict labeled World War II caught their attention. Tens of millions dead. Cities vaporized. Entire populations relocated, tortured, exterminated. Footage showed humans, small, fragile creatures, charging into enemy fire, climbing over the corpses of their own kind. A Varelian linguist, visibly shaken, translated a soldier's words just before a charge. "We hold the line here, or we die trying." Why would a sentient species embrace such destruction? More importantly, how did they survive it? The Varelians dug deeper, peeling through the Earth's digital layers. Every generation seemed to follow the same cycle: peace, escalation, war, rebuilding. From stone clubs to nuclear fire in a blink of evolutionary time. The jump was unnatural. Civilizations typically evolve out of violence. Humanity appeared to evolve into it. The data painted a grotesque timeline. Tribal skirmishes became empire-wide conquests. Spears became rifles. Rifles became orbital missiles. Even the brief interludes of peace were peppered with cold wars. Silent threats, proxy conflicts. Their entire history was a study in escalation. The analysts pulled biological records next, seeking answers in anatomy. The human frame was unimpressive. Bipedal, soft tissue, poor armor, limited regeneration. But anomalies emerged. Muscle density was high for their mass. Reflex response time exceeded most known herbivores or predators. Then came the adrenaline spike, unique among known sapiens. A chemical that surged in moments of fear or rage, unlocking temporary strength, heightened perception, and pain suppression. A built-in combat stimulant. But even that didn't explain the depth of their violence. Biology could allow for defense. But this was conquest. A cultural analyst proposed a theory. What if violence wasn't simply tolerated in human societies but revered, celebrated? The team began running semantic models through the archived language database. Words like honor, glory, revenge, and sacrifice weren't just common. They were core themes in everything from ancient epics to modern music. The analyst noted a disturbing pattern. Humans often framed conflict as a test of character, not a failure of diplomacy. They admired those who fought, especially when the odds were impossible. One of the linguists stumbled upon a preserved speech from a human leader during their most brutal conflict. The translation chilled them. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender. Never surrender. Another line from a different war, different era. Give me liberty or give me death. No negotiation. No compromise. Just the binary choice between freedom and annihilation. Psychological profiles followed next. Scans of recorded interviews with soldiers, survivors, leaders. Consistent traits emerged: determination, obsession with legacy, refusal to retreat. Humans viewed pain as a rite of passage. Loss didn't paralyze them. It drove them. They adapted emotionally at a pace unseen in other species. Where most would flee or freeze under trauma, humans evolved to resist, to rebuild, to retaliate. A junior archivist began to piece together the timeline of technological breakthroughs. The pattern was unmistakable. Nearly every major advancement, flight, radio, nuclear energy, space travel, was born during or immediately after a war. Their innovation thrived on destruction. The Varelians brought the data before the Council of Curators. What began as curiosity had turned into dread. One curator asked, "Are they extinct?" The analyst responded carefully, "We believe so. Their transmissions cease after the planetary climate collapsed." But he hesitated. But what? They may not have died in war. They may have simply gone silent. Speculation turned to unease. If humanity had reached interstellar travel before their fall, if remnants had escaped, then somewhere out there war slept, waiting to awaken. The youngest analyst, barely of age, posed the question no one else dared to ask. What if humans didn't evolve despite war? But because of it, no one answered. In silence, they watched another clip. Grainy footage of a human soldier carrying his wounded comrade through enemy fire. No helmet, no armor, no weapons left. Just blood and grit and a scream lost in the roar of artillery. He made it. He lived. And he smiled when they pulled him into the trench. The Varelians had traveled across galaxies to understand the remnants of Earth. Now, they weren't sure they wanted to know the rest. The final clip auto-loaded. A woman's voice, clear, resolute. "You may outlive us. You may outgun us. But you will never outfight us." The screen faded to black. The Varelians backed away. Something about Earth wasn't just dangerous. It was unnatural. It was built for war. The Varelians' initial curiosity about humanity had now become a growing sense of dread. They had seen the tapes, scanned the records, and observed the devastating brutality of human history. But it wasn't just the wars that unsettled them. It was what they had found beneath the surface. A species so attuned to conflict that every aspect of their biology seemed designed to endure and escalate it. They began with the human body, the physical vessel that carried this dark impulse. The Varelians had observed countless species across the galaxy, studied their biology, and cataloged their unique traits. Yet nothing they had encountered matched the human form in such a disconcerting way. Their bodies were fragile, soft even. They had no natural armor, no exoskeleton or regenerative powers like the more durable species of the galaxy. They lacked the natural weapons of claws, fangs, or speed that predators typically relied on. The Varelians had assumed humans were prey, just another weak species destined for extinction. Yet, there was something unsettling about their resilience. Their physicality didn't make sense in the grand design of the universe. How could a species so physically weak survive for so long, let alone conquer their world and move into space? The first discovery that set off alarms was the human muscle-to-weight ratio. It was higher than it should have been, especially for a species with no natural predatory traits. Humans, despite their softness, could endure incredible feats of physical strain, running long distances, climbing obstacles, and carrying loads that would leave most species incapacitated. They didn't have the strength of massive carnivores or the speed of fleet-footed prey, but in sheer endurance, humans excelled. And then came the adrenaline. The Varelians had studied various species' responses to stress and danger. Most beings would either flee or fight, but humans? Their response was unlike anything else. When faced with peril, their bodies surged with adrenaline, a cocktail of chemicals that unlocked temporary superhuman strength, heightened reflexes, and pain resistance. When a human was in danger, Their mind and body could push beyond their natural limits. This wasn't survival. It was something else, an instinctive embrace of violence. The ability to go beyond pain and fear, to turn it into focus and precision, was uniquely human. The Varelians analyzed battle footage, real human soldiers not in training, but in actual combat. The patterns were clear. When humans fought, they did so without hesitation, without fear of death. Their tactics were primal but effective, intuitive yet complex. In close-quarter combat, they relied not just on brute force but on their ability to think on the fly, to adapt, to improvise in ways that other species simply couldn't. A humanoid species might be strong or fast or resilient, but humans were something else entirely. They were, in a terrifying sense, engineered for conflict. Their minds, their bodies, were finely tuned for survival in a universe that seemed to prize destruction. Every human soldier's body was a finely crafted weapon, one that adapted quickly to its environment, whether it was the harsh deserts of their planet or the sterile, cold void of space. But the deeper they dug into human biology, the more unsettling it became. It wasn't just their physical capabilities. It was their ability to endure psychological trauma. The Varelians found records of human soldiers returning from battle, battered, scarred, traumatized. Yet time and again they re-entered the fray. The ability to withstand not just physical pain but emotional and psychological scars was unparalleled. Where other species would break, falling into despair, retreating into self-preservation, humans adapted. They built strength from their suffering. The more they endured, the more dangerous they became. The Varelians couldn't comprehend it. When they faced hardship, their instincts were to analyze, adapt, and overcome. They would retreat, regroup, and find another solution. But humanity, they didn't just endure hardship. They thrived in it. One Varelian psychologist, a young researcher who had been studying the emotional responses of various species, made a chilling observation. Humans view pain as a challenge, not a setback. They see loss as a part of their evolution, not an obstacle to it. They are capable of suffering, but their minds are structured to use that suffering to fuel further aggression. The Varelians scanned even deeper. They accessed human military records, the psychological profiles of soldiers who had seen war and survived it. Time and again, they found something strange, a consistent theme of perseverance not just for personal survival but for a greater cause, for their comrades, for their families, for their nations. Sacrifice was not just something humans did, they revered it. They understood it at a fundamental level. The idea of selflessness in the heat of battle, of throwing themselves into the path of death to protect others, was an idea that transcended species. It was terrifying because it meant that humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to dominate. They watched videos from human history, films that depicted soldiers storming into battles they had no chance of winning, fighting against overwhelming odds. Their eyes were unflinching. Their faces were set in grim determination. The Varelians had never seen anything like it. When most beings would collapse under the weight of impossible odds, humans seemed to grow more dangerous. They adapted in ways that didn't make sense. But the true horror lay not in their willingness to fight. It was in the way they used war to grow. Every conflict, whether a world war or a skirmish between neighboring tribes, seemed to give birth to something new. New technologies emerged from the rubble. New strategies evolved from bloodshed. In the wake of every destruction, humans found ways to rebuild and, more importantly, to evolve further. The Varelians had never encountered a species so closely tied to the concept of violence. It was ingrained in their biology, their psychology, their very culture. Their greatest achievements were forged in the fires of war. Their greatest minds were born on battlefields, under the weight of unimaginable loss. They were a species whose growth was catalyzed not by peace, but by conflict. The more they fought, the more they became. As they continued their analysis, the Varelians discovered a chilling pattern in humanity's rapid technological evolution. Every major leap, space travel, nuclear energy, artificial intelligence, came on the heels of war. It was as if the destruction of one era gave birth to the innovation of the next. And these innovations, always designed with the capacity for destruction, were then refined and adapted for even greater carnage. One of the senior analysts finally spoke up, his voice trembling with realization. They are a species born from war, designed for it. Every aspect of them, from their bodies to their minds, has been honed for conflict. The more they fight, the stronger they become. The data streams continue to flow in, each new discovery confirming the Varelians' worst fears. Humans were not just resilient in war, they were built for it. And they had only scratched the surface. What could be worse than a species designed for war, evolving with each conflict, growing stronger and more efficient as they tore the universe apart? The Varelians had no answer, but they knew one thing for certain. Earth was a planet unlike any they had ever encountered. The true horror was not in the wars they had fought, it was in the wars they were yet to fight. The Varelians were now fully aware of the implications of humanity's existence. What had started as a simple observation of a long-dead species had transformed into a profound existential crisis for the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. The fact that humans had once been confined to their small, insignificant planet was no longer a comfort. The more the Varelians uncovered about the history of humanity, the more they realized that Earth had only been the first battleground. If humans were allowed to roam freely across the stars, if their destructive impulses were unleashed upon the galaxy, there might be nothing left to stop them. In their research, the Varelians had come across a chilling report written by a human historian, reflecting on the constant, unrelenting cycle of violence that had defined human history. The historian had observed that every major technological advancement, from steam power to advanced weaponry, had been catalyzed by war. Humanity's progress was marked by bloodshed, and each new leap in their capabilities was a direct consequence of destruction. They didn't just survive conflict, they thrived on it. The Varelians had no frame of reference for such a species. There was no species in the known galaxy that had ever experienced such an intimate relationship with war. Even the most violent races in the galaxy had limits, boundaries they would not cross. But humans? They didn't have these boundaries. War wasn't just a means of survival for them. It was an identity. The implications were staggering. If humanity had risen to power on their own world through war, if their very nature had been molded by it, what would happen when they encountered other civilizations? The Varelians, with their history of peaceful exploration and preservation, could not fathom the consequences of such an encounter. The thought alone was terrifying. The first question that echoed throughout the council was simple: what would stop humanity from conquering the stars? The Varelians understood space. They had explored it for eons. They had mapped galaxies, studied planets, established colonies on distant moons and asteroids. But they had never encountered a species quite like humanity. Most civilizations expanded for the sake of survival, resource acquisition, scientific curiosity, or population expansion. But humanity's drive was different. It was a drive forged through conflict, through an instinct to dominate, to bring order to chaos through sheer force. What would happen when humanity encountered peaceful civilizations? Civilizations that had no interest in war, whose entire existence was built on cooperation and diplomacy. The Varelians had studied such societies, and they knew that these peaceful species thrived because they had no need for violence. They focused on trade, technology, and culture. But if humanity encountered them, would diplomacy even be an option? The Varelians were certain that it wouldn't be. The data showed it clearly. Humans did not negotiate with violence, they embraced it. Every peace was temporary, every alliance brittle. Their only true language was war, and when their instincts were triggered, there was no room for compromise. The Varelians knew that once humans understood the vastness of the galaxy, once they unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light travel, they would inevitably come into contact with other species. And when that happened, they would not hesitate to do what they had done throughout their history: dominate, conquer, and destroy. It wasn't just a possibility, it was a certainty. This realization sent waves of panic through the Varelian leadership. For the first time in their long existence, they faced a genuine existential threat. They had been explorers, never conquerors. They had studied war, but never participated in it on the scale that humanity had. The destruction humanity had wrought on their own world could not be ignored. It was a warning, a sign that they were not just a fleeting species, doomed to self-destruct. No, humanity had survived every conflict they had faced, emerging more powerful each time, and the Varelians feared that the galaxy would be their next battleground. As the Council convened to discuss their next steps, the question that loomed large was whether the galaxy's powers should intervene. They had no concrete proof that humanity was still alive, that Earth's collapse hadn't wiped them out completely, but the data didn't lie. There was a disturbing likelihood that humanity had survived their own extinction event. And if they had, the implications were terrifying. The Varelian Council, in an unprecedented move, voted to issue a galactic-wide alert. An emergency protocol was enacted to monitor any transmissions from Earth's location, watching for any signs that humanity had survived their climate collapse and were preparing to leave their home planet. The stakes were clear. Humanity's survival was not just a matter of Earth's fate. It was a matter of the entire galaxy's survival. In the weeks that followed, the Varelians expanded their investigation into the human psyche, hoping to uncover any weaknesses, any vulnerabilities that could be exploited. But they found nothing. The more they studied, the clearer it became that humans did not have the same psychological constraints that most species did. Fear did not paralyze them. It motivated them. Pain did not break them. It made them stronger. Their minds were wired for survival in the harshest conditions imaginable. But it wasn't just survival that drove them. It was something darker, more primal, the desire to conquer. And the more the Varelians understood this, the more they realized that humanity might not just be a threat to the galaxy. They might be the perfect weapon. What if they were not the weak, fragile creatures they had assumed them to be? What if they were the future of warfare itself? The Varelians feared that once humanity discovered their potential, once they realized what they were truly capable of, they would stop at nothing. They would conquer not for resources, but for domination. Not for survival, but for the thrill of war. And when they did, when humanity turned their gaze beyond their broken world, when they reached for the stars, there would be nothing left to stop them. The more the Varelians uncovered, the more they realized just how unstoppable humanity could become. It wasn't just the potential for destruction that terrified them. It was the unstoppable drive that burned in every human being. Humanity's nature was rooted in an insatiable hunger for conquest, for domination, for war. And the Varelians knew with chilling certainty that once humanity set its sights on the stars, it would not hesitate to repeat the patterns of violence that had defined their entire history. With the new data flowing in from their continued surveillance of Earth's long-forgotten transmissions, the Varelians began to piece together a new plan. The galactic leaders convened in a series of high-level summits, urgently discussing how to address this emerging threat. What could they do to prevent humanity from spreading across the cosmos? Could they stop them before they reached the critical threshold of space exploration? The Varelian scientists ran simulations, feeding the data into their vast computational systems. They modeled every possible scenario. They considered diplomacy, but quickly discarded it as a futile effort. Humanity had proven time and again that it could not be reasoned with when their survival instincts were triggered. Negotiation, cooperation, those were luxuries that didn't fit within the framework of human culture. Humanity didn't know peace, didn't respect it. All they understood was war, and so the Varelians turned to other options. The most drastic of these involved creating a containment field, a powerful energy barrier that would prevent any human vessel from ever leaving Earth's atmosphere, keeping them isolated and unable to explore the stars. It was a dangerous proposal, one that would require unprecedented resources and could risk the lives of billions on their homeworld. But it was the only option left. However, as the Council prepared to enact this drastic measure, a single voice in the room asked the question that had been haunting their thoughts for days. What if humanity can't be contained? The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implications. The reality was clear. Humanity had already survived countless extinction events. What if, despite all their efforts, the Varelians couldn't stop them? What if humans, through sheer will, found a way to break through any barriers placed before them? The idea seemed impossible. Humanity was fragile. They had no advanced technology that could rival the capabilities of the Varelians. They lacked the tools to fight a galactic empire. Yet, the more they considered it, the more the Varelians realized that it wasn't about the technology. It wasn't about weapons or advanced warfare. It was about humanity's mind, their desire, their endless, insatiable drive to conquer. The Varelian historians revisited ancient records of early human wars, where much of their tactics seemed primitive by galactic standards. But that, in itself, was another terrifying revelation. Humans didn't need advanced technology to destroy. They were resourceful. They adapted. And once they had tasted the power of space travel, once they had experienced the universe beyond Earth, they would find ways to bend it to their will. The galaxies would become their next battlefield. And unlike any species before them, they wouldn't hesitate to wage war against the stars themselves. The Varelians understood the fundamental truth now. Humans had a capacity for self-destruction, yes, but they also had the remarkable ability to rebuild and adapt. Where most species would have turned inward after suffering, humans learned to fight harder. They learned to use their destruction as a catalyst for growth. They did not break under pressure. They flourished in it. And that, more than anything else, made them dangerous. Faced with this terrifying reality, the Varelians had no choice but to take action. But the question remained. How could they contain a species so relentlessly driven, so determined to spread and conquer? Could they prevent humanity from reaching other systems, from encountering other races, from igniting the next war on a galactic scale? The Council put forward a desperate plan, a preemptive strike. If humanity was allowed to rise and expand into space, they would soon reach the farthest edges of the galaxy, where other peaceful species had no means of defense. The galaxy itself would become their war zone, and no one would be safe. The Varelians could not allow this. They would have to stop humanity no matter the cost. And so, the Varelians prepared for war. It was a bitter decision. They had always prided themselves on their peaceful exploration, their efforts to preserve the galaxy's many cultures. But faced with the overwhelming threat of humanity's inevitable conquest, they had no choice but to turn their most devastating weapons inward. They began assembling fleets, gathering forces for an operation that would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't just about protecting their own. It was about ensuring that the dark impulse of humanity, its relentless drive for war, would never escape the confines of Earth. As the Varelians finalized their plans, a final message arrived from their outer monitoring station. It was a transmission from Earth sent years ago, long before the planet's collapse. The message, although faint, was unmistakable. A human voice, clear and unyielding. "We are coming." The Varelians knew that it was no empty boast. This was a promise. Humanity was not a species to lie down and accept defeat. They were coming, and when they did, they would bring the war to the galaxy. The countdown began. The fleets were mobilized. The containment field would be deployed. But in the back of their minds, a chilling thought lingered. What if humanity had already found a way out? What if they were already in the stars, just waiting to return with a force so vast that even the Varelians, with all their might, would be unable to stop them? There was no turning back now. The galaxy was on the brink of an unprecedented war. The only question left was whether humanity would be contained, or if they would tear the galaxy apart in their insatiable hunger for conflict. And when the dust settled, when the final battle had been fought, there would be no question about who had won. Humanity would be the last species standing.